Hello there, Little Masters, and welcome to another weekly episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, well, things are going to start to go downhill pretty quickly.
Yeah, you're not joking. As the great Han Solo said, I've got a bad feeling about this.
Yeah.
But West do how, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, the Kark to my Roäc, why not, Alan Sisto.
Well, I guess the good news about that comparison, frankly, is that you're old and bald. But the bad news, I guess, would be that I'm dead. So, I don't know if I'm really...
You got mine right, at least.
Yeah.
So.
Well, All right, folks, tonight we are moving on from bad jokes to Chapter 15, The Gathering of the Clouds. And as the title suggests, things are starting to look a little gloomy as we approach the end of the story.
Yeah, we're not exactly seeing the best side of Thorin here today, and that's going to be putting it mildly. Another way of putting it is that he's going to be playing a tune that's familiar to anybody who's read or heard our episodes on the Silmarillion.
Oh, and we can't wait to get to that. But first, It's time for another Tolkien Fun Fact.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get us started, and I need to give a little background first before I jump into this Tolkien Fun Fact. As many Tolkien fans know, the professor was inspired by Finnish, the Finnish language and mythology, in the creation of his legendarium. The language, of course, was an inspiration for Quenya. As for the mythology, he was really inspired by the Kalevala, a 19th century epic poem compiled by Elias Lönnrot from the oral traditions of Finland and Karelia. And I hope
first of all, congratulations on pronouncing that name. That's pretty impressive.
It sounded legit. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll find out. I'm sure we will hear from our Finnish
Somebody
listeners.
out there knows how to pronounce Finnish.
I'm sure they do. Now, of course, we've talked about the Kalevala before. The tragic tale of the hapless Kullervo, which appears in the Kalevala, was one of the inspirations for the story of the children of Hurin.
Right.
And, of course, before that, Tolkien wrote his own version of Kullervo's story, which was published just a few years ago in a critical edition edited by Dr. Verlin Flieger.
That's right. And I think a lot of this is old news for anybody who listens to this show regularly. But what you might not know is that Professor Tolkien was not the only author inspired by the Kalevala. 60 years before Tolkien wrote either his own Kullervo story that was recently published or the story of Turin Turambar, the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow published The Song of Hiawatha. Now, this is a thoroughly American epic poem about an Ojibwe warrior and his tragic love for Minnehaha, a woman from the rival Dakota people in what's today the northern United States. Now, although Longfellow was supposedly writing a story about Native Americans, many of the inspirations for the poem actually came from the Finnish Kalevala. The meter of the poem, which is trochaic tetrameter, and even some of the names were inspired by the Kalevala. Now, not surprisingly, the poem isn't very well received these days. It's not really an accurate depiction of the people or the cultures of the Ojibwe and the Dakota peoples, which is probably obvious if you now know that it's got Finnish stuff mixed in there.
Yeah, I guess that would kind of make that just a little off base. But
a little bit.
Yeah. So John Garth, in an article in the Guardian Online, published back in December of 2014, titled Tolkien's Death of Smaug, American Inspiration Revealed, he noticed a similarity between Smaug's death and a scene in Hiawatha, right down to an archer running out of arrows, a bird telling him where to shoot, and the fact that the monster he's fighting is a symbol of material wealth.
That was pretty cool, and we'll actually put a link up to that article by John Garth in our show notes. But now we're finally getting to my Tolkien fun fact.
So that was all prelude?
That was all prelude to the Tolkien fun, because none of that was
I said all that to say this.
Yeah. So here's the fun fact. Despite the fact that Tolkien and Longfellow were both appreciators of the Kalevala, and despite the fact that according to John Garth, Tolkien seems to have been directly inspired by a scene in Hiawatha for the death of Smaug, Tolkien actually had some pretty harsh words to say about Longfellow's, well, let's call it borrowing, and I'm making air quotes there, of Finnish mythology for his so-called Native American epic, and some harsh words for the poet himself. There's an essay called The Kalevala, published in the volume of The Story of Kullervo that you were just talking about, edited by Verlin Flieger. And in that essay, Tolkien describes Longfellow briefly, and he says Longfellow pirated the Kalevala. And he goes on to say...
Strong words.
That's quite a strong word. And he goes on to say, Hiawatha is not a genuine storehouse of Indian folklore, but a mild and gentle Bowdlerizing of the Kalevala, colored with disconnected bits of Indian lore. And I imagine a few genuine legendary names. Some of Longfellow's names sound altogether too good to be invented. Now,
wow.
I know. John Garth actually pointed out that at least one of Longfellow's names, interestingly enough, actually comes straight from the Kalevala. So probably even some of the ones he didn't invent aren't Native American names. But back to Tolkien, and this is the most fun part. Tolkien goes on to call Longfellow, who, like Tolkien, was a professor of languages, although modern ones. Tolkien called Longfellow in that essay a mild and rather dull American Don.
Boy, he does not mince words, does he?
No, not a bit.
I mean, that's higher praise than he gave Walt Disney, but that's still not saying much.
That is quite true. I know.
Not much of a fan, I'm thinking.
No, not at all. And it all kind of reminds me a little bit of how Tolkien tried to improve on Shakespeare. You know, the whole thing about having trees march to war.
Yep, absolutely. With the Huorns, yeah.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Well, you know, I'd like to get on with the discussion, but before we do, I want to give a quick shout out to Paige in Charlestown, West Virginia.
Yeah.
Paige listens to the podcast every week with her dad, and at 7 years old, she might be our youngest regular listener.
Hi, Paige. Thanks for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you. And one last thing before we move on to the discussion. A couple of episodes back, we talked about Tolkien's preference for silver as opposed to gold when it comes to things of value in Middle-earth.
Oh, yeah, right. We were talking about things like the Scepter of Annúminas and the Elendomir.
That's right. That's right. Well, it turns out there's an in-universe reason for this. Listener Tanya P., who's our go-to specialist on the History of Middle-earth volumes, gave us, and by that I mean she'll correct us when we're wrong.
She corrects us when we're wrong, which
But she also does cool things like this, like fill in the blanks. She gave us this amazing quote from a Tolkien essay in Myths Transformed. It is quite possible, of course, Tolkien says, that certain elements or conditions of matter had attracted Morgoth's special attention, mainly, unless in the remote past, for reasons of his own plans. For example, all gold in Middle-earth seems to have had a specially evil trend, but not silver. End quote. So
Very
that's
cool.
in Volume 10, Part 5, and thank you, Tanya, because that really does shed some light on Tolkien's preference for silver.
Cool. Yeah, we kind of speculated out of universe on why this might be the case, but there's a very good explanation in universe. I love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, now, on with the discussion. Sean, I think you actually have the first reading. Let's just jump right to it.
Yeah, so after a quick interlude in Lake Town, last chapter to see Bard kill Smaug, this chapter's picking back up right where the previous one left off, so I guess I'll start there. Now we will return to Bilbo and the dwarves. All night one of them had watched, but when morning came they had not heard or seen any sign of danger. But ever more thickly the birds were gathering. Their companies came flying from the south, and the crows that still lived about the mountain were wheeling and crying unceasingly above. "Something strange is happening," said Thorin. "The time has gone for the autumn wanderings, and these are birds that dwell always in the land. There are starlings and flocks of finches, and far off there are many carrion birds, as if a battle were afoot." Suddenly Bilbo pointed. "There's that old thrush again," he cried. "He seems to have escaped when Smaug smashed the mountainside, but I don't suppose the snails have."
No, they probably haven't.
They're probably got knocked around quite a bit.
Yeah, they're falling from very, very high mountainsides down to the, bouncing.
Yeah.
No, they're not doing well.
Rolling down the mountain like little rocks.
Until their shells disintegrate, yes.
Yeah.
You know, before we go into the serious discussion, I do have to say that Thorin's line about the autumn wanderings and that the birds that dwell always in the land totally made me think, and you know where I'm going with this, don't you? The swallow may fly south with the sun, or the house martin or the plover may seek warmer climes in winter, yet these are not strangers to our land. No, I'm not suggesting coconuts migrate, just to be clear.
No, of course. Neither do African swallows, of course.
No.
He could grip it by the husk.
He could... or carry a little string between the... Two of them could pick it up together.
It's a simple question of weight ratios. Okay.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. All right. So back to the actual discussion.
Yes, indeed.
You'd think that they'd be aware of what's going on, because earlier we saw the birds, right? So here they're finally starting to pay attention to what this means.
We've seen the birds, mention of the birds gathering in 2 chapters now. 2 chapters happening concurrently. Yeah.
Yeah. But here they're finally noticing one key element, that they're carrion birds as if a battle was afoot. You might want to be thinking
that's a
along those
pretty
lines.
clear sign, yeah.
Let's see. I'm not sure there's a whole lot there other than the arrival of the birds. We just wanted to really touch on that and the fact that they're starting to see this really unusual gathering. And then, of course, the thrush shows up.
The thrush shows up, yeah.
And so he's
tries to communicate with them.
Exactly. And we're not going to read that little bit, but there is something interesting here about the speech of birds that, I finally admit. Finally. No, I think I admitted it last week, but
you did admit it last week. I think
I was wrong. It's clear that the speech is different because the thrush, Balin specifically says, I can't follow it. It's very quick and difficult. So, all right, it is a different
So now
tone.
I'm going to capture that I was wrong audio clip, and I'm going to...
Good luck with that.
I'm just gonna have to play it through my audio on my side and record it. I'll hold up a little recorder to the...
Fine, I'll send you the audio as a stinger. Fine, you can use it whenever you want.
All right, good.
Let's see.
Then I'd need the big board. I don't have the big board.
Oh, goodness.
All right, yes. Let's move on.
Please, quickly. Interesting.
Ravens and crows.
Yeah, the ravens and crows distinction. That's a really big thing. Balin's like, wow, I wish he was a raven because then I could understand him,
Yeah.
And Bilbo, understandably, because if you don't have experience with both of them, it's pretty easy to mix the two of them up. Thinks that
I found out they're actually part of they're both the same genus.
Yeah.
As I was doing some research for this episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're both genus Corvus.
Yes, they are, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the names in a little bit. But for now, I've got a passage I'm going to go ahead and read. Balin responding to Bilbo's confusion of crows and ravens. Those were crows, and nasty, suspicious-looking creatures at that. Rude as well. You must have heard the ugly names they were calling after us. But the ravens are different. There used to be great friendship between them and the people of Thror, and they often brought us secret news, and were rewarded with such bright things as they coveted to hide in their dwellings. They live many a year, and their memories are long, and they hand on their wisdom to their children. I knew many among the ravens of the rocks when I was a dwarf lad. This very height was once named Ravenhill, because there was a wise and famous pair, old Kark and his wife, that lived here above the guard chamber. But I don't suppose that any of that ancient breed linger here now. No sooner had he finished speaking than the old thrush gave a loud call and immediately flew away. We may not understand him, but that old bird understands us, I'm sure, said Balin. Keep watch now and see what happens. And indeed, we'll find out. But interesting because, we talked about this, I think, just briefly once, that this was a change from the original manuscript, wasn't it? That
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the ravens, ravens were not good. They were bad.
Right.
But he changed that, and he changed it pretty substantially here, didn't he?
Yeah. These ravens are, as we'll see in just a moment, these ravens are allies of the dwarves and very helpful.
Powerful allies. Very helpful.
Powerful. They're wise counselors, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but they've gone quite the opposite of being antagonistic to being a big help.
Very much so.
I love this idea about them being rewarded news with shiny objects.
Yeah.
Because
I know, that's so... Yeah,
apparently this is a raven thing. I saw that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that ravens collected shiny things. I knew. I always think of magpies, but
that's true.
But magpies are also related to ravens, so who knew? So they've got. They live for a very long time, don't they?
Mm-hmm. They do. Even in real life, they live for a long time. I was reading someplace that they live somewhere. Well, I don't know about the average. I just remember that there was one particular bird that they. Determined he was something like 35 or 40 years old, wasn't he?
Yeah.
That's a long time for a bird, I would imagine.
It is. I imagine it is quite a long time. But yeah, obviously, the bird that we're about to see here is much older than that.
Well, yeah, he's long beyond the real terrestrial range of a bird.
Yeah. And I love the description that we're about to get of Roäc when he shows up.
I know, it's so it's almost anthropomorphic in its description, huh?
Oh yeah.
He's getting blind.
Decrepit old bird, getting blind.
Top of his head is bald.
Yeah.
He's got a bad comb over. Oh wait, that's not in the text.
No. But an aged raven of great size.
Yeah.
It's a very, very descriptive passage.
It really is, isn't it?
And it's a bird, man. That's cool. It does, like you said, it almost makes it is almost anthropomorphic. It does kind of make it makes him more of a character.
It does. It makes him much more of a character. He's not just a messenger now. He's got some distinctive characteristics that make him, unique, that make him this very special bird. So why don't you tell us what he says?
Okay. Raven voice on. "O Thorin, son of Thrain, and Balin, son of Fundin," he croaked. And Bilbo could understand what he said, for he used ordinary language and not bird speech. "I am Roäc, son of Cock. Cock is dead, but he was well known to you once. It is 100 years and 53 since I came out of the egg, but I do not forget what my father told me. Now I am the chief of the great ravens of the mountain. We are few, but we remember still the king that was of old. Most of my people are abroad, for there are great tidings in the south. Some are tidings of joy to you, and some you will not think so good. Behold, the birds are gathering back again to the mountain and to dale from south and east and west, for word has gone out that Smaug is dead."
Well, ding-dong, huh? I mean,
Ding-dong indeed.
That's some good news.
Yeah.
Though we get that really kind of threatening sound of some you will not think so good.
Yeah.
That's not, foreboding at all. Not
No.
at all.
No. Not at all. Well
Not
done.
at all. I do that more often than I care to in real life, too. Oh, not at all.
It just pops out.
It's just part of what happens,
Yep.
I noticed Kark is dead. I just couldn't help but think that, if he hadn't been nailed to the perch, he'd be pushing up daisies by now. Sorry. It's the plumage.
Lovely plumage, isn't it?
Yeah,
the Erebor raven.
Yeah. Is a Norwegian black raven.
Norwegian. He's not pining, he's passed on.
That's right. He's gone and joined the choir invisible. Anyway. Sorry, folks. We do digress. That's why you like us. That's why you listen to us, is that every once in a while we say some very silly things.
Yes. Every once in a while.
Anyway.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, more often than just every once in a while.
Episode.
Depends on how often you define once in a while. Really.
Yeah,
But he uses ordinary language and not bird speech. Now, I like that. And that's actually a change because in the early version, Tolkien had Balin translating. So what was essentially happening was the thrush told the ravens, and the ravens told Balin, and Balin told the dwarves, and that was a little bit too much.
It would have just been really roundabout.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that Thorin particularly is able to communicate directly with the raven.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, he's the son or the grandson of the king of old. So, But before we get into that, though, I wanted to talk about the names of these birds. These are awesome. Roäc
Kark and Roäc,
Kark.
yeah.
Kark especially just really sounds. Well, tell us about that.
Sounds
right?
like sounds like the bird croak, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's an onomatopoeia, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And what's funny about this, so I'm going to word nerd out a little bit here, which
Please
I think
do,
is why
man.
you're
That's
teeing up for me. Tolkien would have known that actually the word raven itself has an onomatopoeic origin if you go back far enough. Believe it or not, many of the words for ravens and crows, which, as I said, are both members of the same genus, in Indo-European languages, they come from an ancient root word that sounded something like, well, we don't really know exactly how it was pronounced, but usually they render the root as kor, K-O-R-H. And so it basically, linguists believe that this was a root that was intended to imitate the sound of the croak that these birds gave, kor. And this is the root that gave us the Latin name for these birds, corvus or corvus, the Greek word corax, and also a Proto-Germanic word, krabanas, which became Old English hrafen, which became raven, and also Old English hrock, which became the word rook, which is another word for one of these birds. So two things were sort of obvious to me as I was looking at all this. First of all, Kark and Roäc, both of these names come straight from the same sounds as these words for raven. The C's, the R's, that vowel.
That hard K sound, yeah.
Yeah. These are all part of this sort of continuum of names for ravens and crows in Indo-European languages.
Wow.
The second thing that kind of jumped out at me as I saw this is this Proto-Germanic word krabanas, which means crow or raven. I thought immediately of Craban, the Sindarin word for crow.
Crebine
Remember
for
the
the
Crebine
plural,
from
yeah.
Dunland. Yeah, the singular
Yeah.
form of that word Crebine is Craban, which sounds an awful lot like that Germanic word
Crabanas.
Crabanas. And maybe that was an accident. I'm not sure.
No.
I'm sure Tolkien would say it was an accident, but
I'm sure
you know,
you would, yeah.
but it certainly seems like he was influenced by the real world names for those birds. Although
No doubt.
honestly, I probably should know better than to speculate on anything having to do with crows. Not jail crows, but, crows in general.
Wow, that goes back, way back.
That
Now,
does.
Jail Crow of Mandos. Wow, that's an oldie but a goodie.
That was a wonderful one that I stepped in.
Yeah,
trying
that
to
was
speculate
fun.
on crows, but no, this is just super cool, and that's you get that onomatopoeia of these names, and
Yeah.
it does kind of harken back to the words for these creatures in a lot of different languages.
That's really cool. And, not so much word nerd, but more potential sources of inspiration. Both Anderson and Ratliff point out the Norse mythology that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, that Hugin and Munin were ravens that brought
yeah.
news to Odin.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
ravens bringing
Thought and
news
memory.
is not a new thing. Yeah, that's right. Thought
Yeah.
and memory.
Thought and memory, is what their names mean. And, and of course Odin was the god of wisdom, so
Right,
it's
right.
kind of cool that Roäc is the bringer of wisdom to Thorin. Says he
Yeah.
doesn't forget what his father told him and all that. I think Tolkien was thinking of all that stuff when he writes this part.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. So now we get to the fact that the dragon is dead. What an amazing moment. I'm sure that we see the dwarves are they begin to caper about for joy. I don't think we've seen the dwarves capering.
Dwarves don't caper very often. It's a special occasion when dwarves are capering.
No doubt about it.
Dwarves capering. Must be another dragon dead.
Yep. Well, So I'm going to go ahead and read the next few paragraphs here.
All right.
More Roäc, and then we'll discuss what he had to say, as well as, we'll get to Thorin's response after that. So, yes, dead, said Roäc. The thrush, may his feathers never fall, saw him die, and we may trust his words. He saw him fall in battle with the men of Esgaroth, third night back from now at the rising of the moon. It was some time before Thorin could bring the dwarves to be silent and listen to the raven's news. At length, when he had told all the tale of the battle, he went on. So much for joy, Thorin Oakenshield. You may go back to your halls in safety. All the treasure is yours for the moment. But many are gathering hither besides the birds. The news of the death of the Guardian has already gone far and wide, and the legend of the wealth of Thror has not lost in the telling during many years. Many are eager for a share of the spoil. Already a host of the elves is on the way, and carrion birds are with them, hoping for battle and slaughter. By the lake, men murmur that their sorrows are due to the dwarves, for they are homeless, and many have died, and Smaug has destroyed their town. They, too, think to find amends from your treasure, whether you are alive or dead. Your own wisdom must decide your course, but 13 is small remnant of the great folk of Durin that once dwelt here, and now are scattered far. If you will listen to my counsel, you will not trust the master of the lakemen, but rather him that shot the dragon with his bow. Bard is he, of the race of Dale, of the line of Girion. He is a grim man, but true. We would see peace once more among dwarves and men and elves after the long desolation, but it may cost you dear in gold. I have spoken.
I'm glad that there isn't Raven dialogue in every single chapter.
Seriously, yeah, I'm very grateful that, We will not be reading any books where ravens are the main characters, let's just say that.
No.
Very
He couldn't just leave it at nevermore. No. Oh, no, he's got to go much farther than
seriously. That was a wonderful reference. Somehow I knew that was coming.
that. Of course.
Sorry, every time we read something about the legend of the something, so, we get the legend of the wealth of Thor, and I lost.
I know where
I'm
you're
sorry,
going.
you know where I'm going, don't you?
The legend of the rent
is way past due. Yeah, there's your School of Rock reference for the night, folks. I love the wisdom of Roäc here.
He is clearly the wisest creature. Thing
wisest
here right
entity,
now.
No doubt about it. He might have more wisdom than the 13 dwarves combined, I have a feeling.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, don't trust the master, trust Bard.
Mm-hmm. And the key here is the ultimate goal. We want to see peace among all three dwarves, men, and elves.
Yeah, you're right about that, yeah.
Because that's what was there before. This guy remembers that. Well, he remembers his father telling him about that.
True, yeah.
That there was a time when this was true. My goodness, I love the little line about the thrush. May his feathers never. I love that cool line. May his feathers never fall.
Little shout out between birds.
Hey, what up, thrush? Yo,
my man.
Give me knucks. You can tell I have a 6-year-old. Give me knucks, little man. Boom.
Do birds have knucks? I don't even know.
I don't know.
Give me wing.
Give me wing.
Give me talon. There you go.
Little high wing right there.
Little high wing.
Up high, down low. Treasures the dwarves for now, but armies approach. And then, don't trust the master, which, hello.
That, he says for the moment, the treasure is yours for the moment. That speaks volumes.
Yeah. Boy, doesn't he? He's just reminding him, well, it was yours, then it was Smaug's. Now it's yours, but that's still also temporary. Yeah, for now. Yeah, and then I just come back to what I mentioned earlier, but it's what he wraps up with here is that the importance of peace. I really just think that's going to be so central to the next chapter and a half that it's really worth focusing on just for a moment. But Thorin will have none of it, does he?
No, none at all. I mean, he kind of has
not interested.
It's like the absolute wrong answer, which is about to come here. So
talk to the hand, he says.
Right. All right. Then Thorin burst forth in anger. Now thanks, Roäc, Kark's son. You and your people shall not be forgotten. But none of our gold shall thieves take or the violent carry off while we are alive. If you would earn our thanks still more, bring us news of any that draw near. Also, I would beg of you, if any of you are still young and strong of wing, that you would send messengers to our kin in the mountains of the north, both west from here and east, and tell them of our plight. But go specially to my cousin Dan in the Iron Hills, for he has many people well armed, and dwells nearest to this place. Bid him hasten. I will not say if this counsel be good or bad, croaked Roäc, but I will do what can be done. Then off he slowly flew.
I won't say whether your idea is any good or bad.
I love
really,
that.
I won't. I mean, that speaks volumes.
That response speaks volumes too.
Volumes in its supposed neutrality, doesn't it? I mean,
it totally does.
Just like, that's as close to Roäc calling Thorin an idiot as you're going to get.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like, okay, I'm not going to tell you what I think of this, but okay, sure.
Fine.
I'll help you. You do you, Thorin. I'll help you out.
We keep coming back to that, don't we? I love that. And by the way, please go and get Dan because he has those really cool things that knock arrows out of the air. And then, they're a combination anti-arrow artillery weapon. I'm sorry.
I don't even know what you're talking about at this point.
From the terrible films. I
know. I don't remember.
Yeah, I wish I could.
I have whiteout on my brain.
I really wish I could.
A lot of that.
If you can give me some of that, I would be grateful.
I'll send it to you.
I would just like to forget the worms. I would really like to forget the worms.
The worms are the one thing I can't forget, just because of my love for Dune.
We have worms, sire.
Hulud.
Thorin's response here is really, really telling. His immediate response. Really, let's be honest. Yes, he says our thanks first, but really that's not his immediate response. That's more like let me give you this preliminary, but here's the main point. He really is dismissing any potential claim without hearing him. He's immediately labeling these people thieves or the violent. And that may be true of the elves who don't seem to really have any legitimate claim, and I don't know really why they're there. But, like Roäc said, the men of Dale think to find amends. Smaug's destroyed their town. They're homeless. Many have died. Yeah. And they're the ones that killed Smaug for you. So
you would think if anyone would understand that, Thorin would.
You'd think he would.
Dragon came and destroyed your home, and now you're homeless. Yeah.
Exactly. That's precisely what I'm thinking. You don't have a home anymore, and you wanted people to help you out in your desire to get revenge against the dragon. And now the very people who helped you
need a little help because they helped you.
Yeah.
They've now lost everything because they helped you.
Yeah.
And he's
mostly because Bilbo said something stupid like Barrel Rider, but we won't go there.
Yeah, that's true, but
he knew Smaug knew they had
help.
Yeah. They had help. The horses, there was no way they were going to get those through the forest, so yeah.
Right. It's like if Thorin had looked had a multiple choice question, he gave the absolute wrong answer.
Oh yeah,
and he gave it right
C,
away.
Or D, and he said N.
Q.
Yeah, Q.
And he gave it right away. He's like, oh, this is totally Q. I got this.
Yeah, exactly. No phone a friend. No using a lifeline here. This was
he just
total confidence in his answer, even though he's absolutely dead wrong.
Yep.
It's funny because the old kingdom of Erebor, we're going to get to this a number of times through this chapter and next, just a reminder that kingdom had partnered with Dale and prospered from it. That mutual prosperity happened because they listened to each other and worked with each other. So Thorin's
it really was kind
refusal,
of a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. So for Thorin to toss that out is foolishness and really a sign that he's starting to come under the dragon sickness. So
yeah, I think so. I definitely think so.
We won't read the next little bit, but clearly they're now going to have to get ready for a siege.
Yeah.
And Bilbo, very practical, of course, is concerned about food. I love that.
He's always practical on such points.
And he thinks, as I think you and I would probably think if we were there, that isn't the hard part over? I mean, we've killed the dragon. The adventure's over. We're done. And I love this. He would have given, even though we're not reading it, I'm reading it. He would have given most of his share of the profits for the peaceful winding up of these affairs.
Yeah.
And later on, we'll see that he's willing to give all of his share of the profits for that.
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He really just wants it to be done. He wants to get this over with and get back home.
Yeah.
And again,
he's done his bit.
A couple of episodes ago, we talked about the difference between Bilbo's perspective because he still has the long journey back again.
Oh yeah.
He's gone there. He's still got to go back again. The dwarves are going to stay here.
Yeah.
So they've got all the time in the world at this point to hang out here.
Remodel
they're going to be
halls.
besieged, and that's they're going to be stuck there for a while.
Yeah,
but Bilbo wants to get this, to get on with it and get back home.
Yeah, we've done the hard part. Let's do the rest. And this is really for Bilbo, from his perspective. This is not a good thing. This is putting a wrench in the works here.
Yep.
Well, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and read here as they prepare for the siege. They explored the caverns once more and found, as they expected, that only the front gate remained open. All the other gates, except of course the small secret door, had long ago been broken and blocked by Smaug, and no sign of them remained. So now they began to labor hard in fortifying the main entrance, and in making a new path that led from it. Tools were to be found in plenty that the miners and quarriers and builders of old had used, and at such work the dwarves were still very skilled. As they worked, the ravens brought them constant tidings. In this way they learned that the Elven King had turned aside to the lake, and they still had a breathing space. Better still, they heard that 3 of their ponies had escaped, and were wandering wild far down the banks of the running river, not far from where the rest of their stores had been left. So while the others went on with their work, Fili and Kili were sent, guided by a raven, to find the ponies and bring back all they could. They were 4 days gone, and by that time they knew that the joined armies of the lake men and the elves were hurrying toward the mountain. But now their hopes were higher, for they had food for some weeks with care, chiefly cram, of course, and they were very tired of it, but cram is much better than nothing. And already the gate was blocked with a wall of squared stones laid dry, but very thick and high across the opening. Oh, goodness. No gate at all, just a wall. I mean, this is their only entrance-exit, and there's no door, there's no gate. We're just sealing it up.
We're just going to stay here. Short-sighted. So short-sighted.
Very, very short-sighted. Though we do get a reminder of their skill in building. That is a cool thing. 13 dwarves is able to do this.
That is a cool thing. I mean, especially because they've been kind of useless throughout the book. And we're now reminded that they may not be much of adventurers or dragon slayers, but they make up for it as skilled miners and builders. I think that's cool. They are dwarves, after all.
After all, they are. And the ravens keep bringing them news. because that's what ravens do. That's what Hunan and Munan do for Odin. So it's what they do for Thorin. They learn of the delay of the Elven King. Now, it's interesting. It's that they turned aside to the lake, which they did because they had, anyone? Compassion.
I'm sorry.
No, that's a good.
That kind of broke me.
That should, you know.
Yeah, they did.
That's the whole thing. Come on, Thorin, you got some breathing space because the Elven King was actually taking some pity on these poor people.
Yeah.
That should tell you something when that jerk of an Elven King is actually nicer than you are.
Yeah. He has a heart.
And of course, they do find out the good news about the ponies, which is indeed good
stores.
news, especially for the ponies.
So they've got plenty of cram now.
Yeah, well, and they have some ponies if they really get hungry.
That's true. Yeah. At least they don't have bully beef.
There you go. No bully beef. I love that. Was that in our? That was in our postscript.
That was in our
it?
postscript. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have to. We might have to put a little context to that for our listeners.
Yeah.
We were talking about. Oh goodness!
Whether cram was inspired by the food Tolkien ate
by trench biscuits specifically.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go into much more detail because, frankly, that's why you should join our Patreon family and get access to our postscripts. So, if you want to learn more, do that. You know where to find us.
There you go.
And again, just that entrance. The fact that they've closed it up and making entrance just about impossible.
Completely sealed it up.
Yeah. What does that say? I think that speaks.
Well, I think the next sentence kind of tells us exactly what that says. There are holes in the wall through which they could see or shoot.
Yeah.
They're thinking about being able to shoot out. They're preparing for a war.
Yeah, they
don't
really
expect to have to leave. They know they're going to be besieged, and they want to be able to shoot.
Yeah, and they're certainly not going to try to go out and carry out sorties against the sieging armies.
No.
They don't have the numbers for that.
No, and they're also not going to go out and parley.
No, you're right. They are not going to parley. I think that's really telling. And we're going to see how they respond to parlays as well.
Yep.
Parley, I don't know, parlay. Just
little Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah, Pirates of the Caribbean. They're mostly guidelines. All right. With that terrible digression aside, let me have you read.
It's not our worst.
It's not our worst, no. But that's a really low bar to say it's not our worst.
That is very true.
That's really sad. I mean, we're 82 episodes in, and we should not be anywhere near our worst.
No,
really.
That's true.
Very far from it.
That's true. Pretty good Jeffrey Rush, though, I have to say.
Oh, if I could remember any more of the lines, then maybe I could do a little bit better. I really liked that first one. That first one was a lot of fun.
Then I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request.
Love that. Thank you. See, I am disinclined to acquiesce to your request.
There you go.
So, Sean, let me go ahead and have you pick up, where I've got you marked to read.
The next
little reading. Yeah, well, let's do that.
That night the dwarves slept little. The morning was still pale when they saw a company approaching. From behind their wall, there watched them come up to the valley's head and climb slowly up. Before long they could see that both men of the lake armed as if for war, and elvish bowmen were among them. At length the foremost of these climbed the tumbled rocks, and appeared at the top of the falls. And very great was their surprise to see the pool before them, and the gate blocked with a wall of new-hewn stone. As they stood pointing and speaking to one another, Thorin hailed them. "Who are you," he called in a very loud voice, "that come as if in war to the gates of Thorin, son of Thrain, king under the mountain? And what do you desire?" But they answered nothing. Some turned swiftly back, and the others, after gazing for a while at the gate and its defenses, soon followed them. That day the camp was moved to the east of the river, right between the arms of the mountain. The rocks echoed then with voices and with song, as they had not done for many a day. There was the sound, too, of elven harps and of sweet music, and as it echoed up towards them, it seemed that the chill of the air was warmed, and they caught faintly the fragrance of woodland flowers blossoming in spring.
Ah, just a touch of beauty in the midst of this desolation. I love that.
I do love that. A little spring in November here from the elves.
Yeah, it really is. It's a moment. It's a blink in the abyss kind of moment.
Yeah.
We've seen so many of those, but you get this reminder: these are elves. These are good people. This is fairy, and
they bring pleasant smells with them.
Yeah, they do.
You know me and elf smell. Ever since
like
chapter
elf
3,
spirit.
I've been obsessed with the smell of elves. Smells like elves.
New Axe fragrance, elf spirit, and you can just slather that on your body for you.
But what does it smell like? Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Well, probably like woodland flowers blossoming in spring.
That's one possibility. That is one possibility.
So I want to take note of a few things here. The first group of people that come up here that we see, the men and the elves. Mm-hmm. I think from the dwarves' perspective, of course, they're seeing these guys armed for war. But let's keep in mind, they had no idea the dwarves had lived. They had every reason to think the dwarves were dead. They're armed because they don't know what they're going to find in Smaug's cave. Whether he'd allied with goblins or whether there were just creatures living there. They're armed because they have no idea what they're going to find when they get there. And they know that the word of Smaug's death would have gotten around.
That is an excellent point.
I mean, they had to have assumed, I would have assumed, everybody would have believed when the mountainside got smushed that day that Thorin and company were gone.
Would have been destroyed with it, yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, it was only their destruction that would have allowed Smaug to have the opportunity, let's say, to go and destroy Lake Town.
Yeah. It is an interesting case of communication breakdown, isn't it? Because you've got these scouts kind of going up there to investigate what's there, thinking it could be goblins or baby dragons or who knows what else.
Baby dragons.
You never
Smaug's ticked off widow and
left me all alone with these babies. Yeah. But then the dwarves, here's a place where I kind of sympathize with the dwarves a little bit. Can you imagine their reaction when they see Lake Towners, who last we've heard have been their allies, but now they're armed for war side by side with elves.
With the elves.
They're known enemies whose dungeon they would still be rotting in if they hadn't escaped from.
That is true. That is entirely true.
And I feel like they must feel betrayed already. And
that's a good point. Yeah.
So if they just bothered to talk to each other, maybe the situation would have been better. Although maybe not. Maybe not.
They might not have had the authority to. They're thinking, I need to go back and tell the general.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the fact that they left wordlessly. I mean, they didn't even try to hail them or anything.
No.
So it sounds like they probably were just sent out to look and not talk.
Yeah, because again, they would think, okay, what's in the mountain now? We got to see. What's this going to look like? What do we have to face?
And when we saw how much good talking did later on, so maybe it would.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, sadly, it is interesting though that they moved the camp, to the east of the river, right between the arms of the mountain. So they do move it into position for a siege now. Immediately. So I can't really say that they're entirely without some fault here.
Yeah. They're ready. They're ready for military action. Yeah.
Yeah, if necessary. Though you'll see that is really their last resort in just about every opportunity they're given.
Yeah.
Even in the parley we'll see later. So, Bilbo and the younger dwarves, presumably that means Fili and Kili and maybe some others, they really wished that things were different and that they could welcome these people as friends. But nobody is going to cross Thorin right now.
No.
And
they know better.
Yeah, they really do. They really do. So the dwarves, since there's already some music going on, decide, well, I don't really like that playlist. I'm going to, I got to get my Pandora going here.
Guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get some of our own music going.
So that's exactly what they do. They get some instruments that they got from the Horde, presumably those harps that Fili and Kili had pulled off the wall, and some more.
The ones that were still in tune.
Yeah, the ones that were, the magically still in tune with the silver strings. And I'm going to go ahead and read the first two and last two stanzas of the Dwarven Song.
And this is a really, really cool song and really interesting change we're going to see here, or hear here.
Oh, it really is, yeah. Under the mountain dark and tall, the king has come unto his hall. His foe is dead, the worm of dread, and ever so his foes shall fall. The sword is sharp, the spear is long, the arrow swift, the gate is strong. The heart is bold that looks on gold, the dwarves no more shall suffer wrong. And now we'll skip down to the last two. Now call we over mountains cold, come back unto the caverns old. Here at the gates the king awaits, his hands are rich with gems and gold. The king is come unto his hall, under the mountain dark and tall. The worm of dread is slain and dead, and ever so our foes shall fall. Well,
They almost sing that like they think they killed the worm themselves.
yeah, that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. Kind of like, you have absolutely nothing to do with the nature of the dragon
with
being
the worm
slain.
of dread being dead. Yeah.
Yeah, none.
Yeah.
None whatsoever. Zero.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that you drove him out of his hole so that he could wipe out an entire town before dying. Right. I guess you do get some credit for that. I don't know. Though really Bilbo gets the credit for that.
Yeah.
Notice the incredibly martial tone.
Absolutely. That's the first thing. Yeah.
That's it. That jumps out at you. I mean,
it does. The original version of this song was nostalgic, and it was talking about these wonders that they created, and we still get some of that in the middle verses that you didn't read.
Right. Well, we get those are almost identical to the verses from the first chapter version.
But the stuff, I'm glad you read the stuff you did, because that's where you get these really strong change.
That second stanza in particular, I mean, it takes the second stanza. I don't know if it was the second stanza, but one of the stanzas in the old version, the chapter 1 version, describes the way Erebor functioned before. They said that for ancient king and elvish lord, and remember we decided that meant ancient king of men,
right?
And elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard they shaped and wrought, and light they caught to hide in gems on hilt of sword.
Right.
So here they are making treasure for other races. They're obviously in peace, and they're trading, and they're working together with these people. And here, oh no, this is now. Our swords are sharp, spears long, arrows swift. Our gate is strong. This isn't some historical song they're referencing. This is now.
This is now.
Our gate is closed. You're not coming in. And then the irony for them to say the dwarves no more shall suffer wrong. What wrong are they going to suffer at the hands of the lake men, who have the absolute right, or at least Bard does, to say, Dragon Slayer here. So, this is really, really disappointing.
It is.
They've been done wrong. I mean, there's no doubt. This no more shall suffer wrong.
Oh, certainly. But not by anybody who's asking for gold. Well, by the Elven King, I guess, who's asking for gold. But not by
we
Bard.
don't know if he's asking yet. But true. I mean, he may be there to side with Bard and to help Bard and have some leverage. But
certainly not by the people of Lake Town. They've not.
No, he's not been wrong by then.
No.
If anything, they were helped significantly.
Yeah.
So
I can't help but notice you talked about the fact that before it was open and trading, and now they're talking about this closed gate. I also can't help but notice in the original verse they describe the hilt of the sword, whereas in this verse they describe the blade of the sword. The sword is sharp.
Yeah, it goes from the craftsmanship and the beauty to the functionality and the martial nature.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. To the damage these things can do.
Exactly.
I even noticed on the last couple of verses, now call we over the mountains cold. There's this commanding nature to it. There's like a demand of fealty there.
Yeah. They're calling to the other dwarves, the other
wandering
the other
folk,
dwarf
the summoned
kingdoms.
heed. Yeah, I mean, Thorin is very comfortably in his king role here.
Yeah,
he's ready to call himself king, and he's ready to demand the allegiance of others.
And interestingly, he's willing to give gifts for that fealty, right? He's able to say his hands are rich with gems and gold. So this is very traditional, right? The earls
very
and the kings gave gifts.
Idea, yeah.
Yep, that's how you won.
Gold Lord, yeah.
Exactly. That's how you got your armies. That's how you got your loyal soldiers. Interesting that his generosity only serves to build a military force instead of spending a little bit of money in order to avoid the necessity of that military force. I mean,
that's a really good point.
It's just so penny wise, pound foolish here. I do have to say, though, in fairness, we talked about how they were done wrong by Thranduil and not by Bard or the men. I do want to point out that Thranduil really has absolutely zero legitimate reason to be here. He has no reason to be marching on the mountain. He has every reason to have come to help Bard. That's awesome, but that's not why he was coming.
But that's not why he left in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's what was so funny about that moment. Like, oh, why are you guys marching? Okay,
yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Corey Olsen actually has just a really quick quote about that I want to give here. He says, "The army of the wood is descending on the mountain simply as scavengers, seeking to gorge themselves on the remains of the misery of others."
Ooh, well said.
So, yeah, I know. It's very, very dark light in which the Elven King's forces are cast here.
Just his presence here speaks volumes about his... we go back to some of the very first things we found out about him. Remember, for him, his problem was that his treasure hoard was never big enough.
That's right.
This was a guy who was always comparing himself to Well, to Thingol, really.
Right. To the
though
Elven
he's not
Lords
named.
of old. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right, to the Elven Lords of old. He just doesn't have enough treasure.
Right.
And that's why he's marching. Now, at the time that they left, they, again, don't know that the dwarves are still alive. They probably presumed he's dead. So in fairness, there's a reason he brought a whole army and not just a bunch of gold transporters, you know.
Sure.
I mean, you know, you got to have an army to move that treasure anyway.
Bring their bags of holding.
Yeah. But certainly now that they know the dwarves are there, things change, and we'll see a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But you know, you read that line from Olson about Thranduil's army. He had another line that was, well, sadly not as short, but really good and worth reading, about the song in this last song, and I love this. In this line, the dwarves confidently predict that all of their enemies will suffer the same fate as the dragon. The dwarves, and I love this phrase, poetical chest thumping seems to have overreached itself here, falling into unintended irony. Both verses implicitly claim credit for the death of the dragon, even though everyone present knows perfectly well that no dwarf had even the most indirect involvement with the slaying of Smaug.
Yep.
They're saying that the dwarves' enemies will always suffer the same fate as the dragon, but that would actually translate to death at the hands of our allies, guided by fate, assisted by the local fauna, and enabled by the information obtained by our friend the Hobbit. Right. I love that. Man, he just nailed that.
It's great.
He goes on to just say that, in short, the slaying of Smaug was a community effort by those who've been the dwarves' well-wishers. Sadly, those also turn out to be the very people these lines are intended to threaten.
Boy, that is absolutely well said. And
yeah.
Which
is why he's writing a book and we're just doing a podcast.
Right.
Just saying.
Right.
Can you imagine a book?
He's
if we
done
wrote a
this
book,
plus a
it would
book,
be filled with digressions.
Would it be great?
Filled with digressions. It would be like 8,000 pages and only about 2,000 would be on Tolkien. It would be very sad.
Right.
So, no books.
The rest would just be lists of 80s bands we like.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, pages of script from Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Needless to say, the song pleases Thorin, but Bilbo is kind of depressed.
Oh, yeah. With good reason. I mean, he knows that he's
he
not
knows
going
this
home
forebodes.
anytime soon.
Yeah, this is sad. This is like, man, really, does it have to end this way?
Because he really thought the adventure was over. He really thought it was, okay, quest is over, problem solved.
Cave,
but,
treasure, dead dragon, we're all good, man.
And there's enough treasure
14th.
there that if Thorin would just give some to the people who are asking for it, he would be able to, this would be done. But he won't.
And now we're about to get to the actual request, aren't we? So I'm going to go ahead and have you read this first parlay.
All right. The next morning, early, a company of spearmen was seen crossing the river and marching up the valley. They bore with them the green banner of the Elven King and the blue banner of the lake, and they advanced until they stood right before the wall at the gate. Again Thorin hailed them in a loud voice. "Who are you that come armed for war to the gates of Thorin, son of Thrain, king under the mountain?" This time he was answered. A tall man stood forward, dark of hair and grim of face, and he cried, "Hail, Thorin! Why do you fence yourself like a robber in his hold? We are not yet foes, and we rejoice that you are alive, beyond our hope. We came expecting to find none living here, yet now that we are met, there is a matter for a parley and a council." "Who are you, and of what would you parley?" "I am Bard, and by my hand was the dragon slain, and your treasure delivered. Is that not a matter that concerns you? Moreover, I am by right descent the heir of Girion of Dale, and in your hoard is mingled much of the wealth of his halls and towns, which of old Smaug stole. Is that not a matter of which we may speak? Further, in his last battle, Smaug destroyed the dwellings of the men of Esgaroth, and I am yet the servant of their master. I would speak for him, and ask whether you have no thought for the sorrow and misery of his people. They aided you in your distress, and in recompense you have thus far brought ruin only, though doubtless undesigned."
You know, I like that last bit. He really is giving Thorin the benefit of the doubt, saying, look, I don't think, nobody thinks
we know you didn't mean
to on purpose.
Destroy our town.
Right. But our town is nevertheless destroyed, and maybe that would be. So let's look specifically at the actual three claims, right? We've got Bard as the dragon slayer, We've got, I'm also the heir of Girion, and a lot of your treasure in
Some
there
of that treasure is ours. Yeah.
Is from Dale. Mm-hmm. And then, hey, by the way, there's a town that's completely gone and a bunch of people are dead and homeless and, maybe a little help would be nice. We're starting a GoFundMe for Esgaroth, and we'd like for you to be the first generous donor. The narrator even tells us these words are fair and true.
Fair and true. Yeah, that's the next
The
sentence
narrator
after
tells us that. That's huge.
Yeah. That's our objective. That's our impartial observer.
Exactly. That's the impartial observer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then our own character in the story.
As we're going to get, I guess. Yeah.
Well, that's true. Bilbo being us in the tale, right? I mean, that's who we're supposed to see the story through. Even Bilbo thinks that Thorin would admit the justice in these words.
Yeah. Well, I think he still believes that Thorin is a better person than he is. Mm-hmm. I think he still kind of believes.
Or that I think he thinks that Thorin is still really under his own control at this point. I think.
Yeah.
I don't think he understands dragon sickness yet. I don't think he understands the lust for gold that dwarves have.
Yeah.
Combine that with the dragon sickness. The power that lies over these hordes that dragons have laid on, because he's a little bit immune to it, really.
Yeah.
Not entirely, but for the most part. He may not be understanding quite what's going on in Thorin's heart and mind right now. But,
yeah. But also Bilbo's got a humility that I think is spoken to in actually where's that part? I think it might even be the next sentence when he talks about, he didn't expect anyone to remember that he was the one who figured out the dragon's weakness, and it's okay because nobody ever did.
Right.
He doesn't have a problem with that, or he doesn't seem to have a problem with that.
He's okay with that. He's like, my 1/14th share is perfectly fine.
Yeah, he doesn't need the glory. He's humble. So I think that is kind of alien to him, the way that Thorin's behaving.
Yeah, Thorin's thought process is just not something that Bilbo can put himself into. He can't step into the shoes of Thorin. Instead, he just assumes that Thorin's a decent folk, or that he's a decent person, and that he would therefore admit the justice that's in these words, these three claims.
Right.
But the narrator not only tells us they're fair and true, he also tells us that the lust of the treasure and the power of gold was on Thorin.
Yeah.
And Thorin, interestingly...
And dwarvish hearts. He mentions dwarvish hearts specifically.
Oh, yeah, specifically. That the power that gold has, upon which a dragon has long brooded, so there we're talking about the power of the dragon, nor with dwarvish hearts. So Bilbo didn't reckon with that.
Yep.
And it's, even after all this time with the dwarves, journeying for... What are we at now? 6 months ballpark? I mean, maybe a little less than that, right? May to November.
About that,
So something around that in that timeline. Yeah. Even with all that, he never saw this aspect of them.
Right.
And that's understandable. There was never really that opportunity.
There was never this opportunity, to see them bewitched by gold like this. Yeah.
So of course his naivete, if you want to call it that, is completely understandable.
Yeah.
Thorin, like anybody else backed into a corner with multiple claims, only critiques one. He ignores the other two. I'm going to read this bit, but it makes me so mad because Thorin doesn't even have anything legitimate to say against
He goes after the third claim, but he just ignores the first two. And
Yeah.
It's just like, it's obvious why.
It's obvious why.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing that can be said. Of course, Bard should get something for being the Dragon Slayer. And of course, there's plenty of Dalish treasure in there that belongs to the line of Girion.
Right, yeah.
I mean,
he can't deny any of that.
No, but he ignores that entirely and instead critiques the last claim. And I'm going to go ahead and read that.
Right.
You put your worst cause last and in the chief place, Thorin answered, thus proving that he subscribes to the psychological rule known as the effect of recency versus the effect of primacy. Do you remember this?
Okay, yeah, the most recent.
Because primacy is when you list something first, and that's because you always tend to remember if you give a person a list, they remember the first thing and the last thing.
Right.
And you could argue primacy meaning the first thing that's the most important, or recency meaning the last thing that's most important.
There you go.
Boy, that's like 20 some odd years ago. Because I went to college when I was 12.
The old debate life coming back to you?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Psych 101, I think, from that one. But anyway. Okay. To the treasure of my people, no man has a claim, because Smaug, who stole it from us, also robbed him of life or home. The treasure was not his, that his evil deeds should be amended with a share of it. The price of the goods and the assistance that we received of the lakemen we will fairly pay, in due time. But nothing will we give, not even a loaf's worth, under threat of force. While an armed host lies before our doors, we look on you as foes and thieves. It is in my mind to ask what share of their inheritance you would have paid to our kindred, had you found the hoard unguarded and us slain." "A just question," replied Bard. "But you are not dead, and we are not robbers. Moreover, the wealthy may have pity beyond right on the needy that befriended them when they were in want. And still my other claims remain unanswered. I will not parley, as I have said, with armed men at my gate, thus proving once again he's going to ignore points 1 and 2.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Nor at all with the people of the Elven King, whom I remember with small kindness. In this debate they have no place. Begone now, ere our arrows fly." You know, he ends that with a relatively valid point. I'm not going to parley with armed men. You're going to come here unarmed, and we're going to have a conversation. And by the way, send those elves home.
Send those elves home, because they're no friends of mine. And
yeah,
he's got
That's
a point.
not a bad point. Yeah,
Yeah, but it's just not. It's not nice. It's not good
not
at all.
nice. You're right. It's
bad.
not.
You know?
And you know, Bard has a point. We're not going to read it, but Bard's point is like, hey, look, the Elven King's my friend. He's here as my ally. He's helped us. We had no claim but friendship, and that they helped us. And you know, you need to think this through. You're gonna have to take back your words.
he really does need to think it through, because he's just, again, I mentioned this earlier. He has so much in common with the people of Esgaroth right now. Their home was destroyed by a dragon, just like his home was destroyed.
Exactly.
And yet, Thorin shows no sense of community, no sense of fellowship with them. He just treats it like it's bad business, a bad business deal to give these people some of his money.
You know, it's funny. We're going to come up on a first age comparison pretty soon, and I won't spoil that yet.
We are, but
what you just said made me think of a separate first age comparison. Remember when we talked about the kind of the cheek, really, that Feanor, the sort of the way he dismissed the nature of the ships that he stole from the Teleri. You know, when he gets to the other side, and one of his sons, Mithras, I think. No. Who?
I think it was Mithras.
I think it was Mithras. Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was Mithras. Yeah. Said, you know, who are we going to send the ships? Who's going to man the ships to go back and get everybody else? And like none and none. And he burns the ships. And I remember thinking at this time, this is a guy who had his most special creation stolen from him. And in the heat of the moment, he goes and does these terrible things, and in an effort to try to pursue the person who took these things.
Yeah.
We're told specifically that the boats of the Teleri, the ships of the Teleri, were like the Silmarils were to them, and that they could never again make them.
Right.
And yet he discards them like so much trash. It's the same thing. It's this. You can't identify with these people no matter how obvious the comparison should be.
Right.
And that's the thing. You know, it's like Feanor should have understood those ships are special. Even if you've killed the Teleri, send some of the boats back. Come on, you know. Because they're like the Silmarils to them. Well, you know, Thorin, these guys have had the exact same experience you had. You're complaining that your Silmarils were stolen. You know, your city was destroyed by a dragon and your treasure taken. But the exact same thing has happened to them.
It's a complete lack of empathy.
Total.
And even if he did not have any genuine empathy for them, as a king coming into his own, wouldn't you think that you would want to start off on the right foot by showing some charity to the people, to the people
to your
of
nearest, to your nearest
neighbors,
neighbor,
who, by the way, are the people who are going to be growing any food that you might possibly eat.
And who, by the way, helped you when you were absolutely weaponless, and
they showed him charity, and he cannot show them charity. And Ratliff actually has an interesting a little note on this that I can read. It's pretty quick. It says, Thorin's rejection of charity, which should be a legitimate concern, whatever the legitimacy or otherwise of all the other claims, is a warning sign of just how deeply sunk in dragon sickness he has fallen. The Elven King's delaying his expedition to seize the treasure in order to help the victims of the disaster at Lake Town gives him the moral high ground. Gives him the high moral ground in the third phase text over Thorin, who will not even repay the charity he received a few weeks earlier when he was similarly cold, hungry, destitute, and homeless.
Man, that's excellent. You're right. I mean, I might not think all that highly of Thranduil, but at least he does have the moral high ground here.
Yeah.
Because he was willing to show kindness and charity to the men of Lake Town.
Right.
Man, that's just
really, Thorin is just not in... this is the worst side of Thorin we've seen.
Yeah, it really is. And it's not the worst we'll see, but it's pretty close.
True.
Well, we're going to see a little bit, actually, coming up.
Pretty soon.
You're going to read this the next attempt to parlay.
Yep. So a few heralds come up and blow their trumpets, and then one of them speaks. "In the name of Esgaroth and the forest," one cried, "we speak unto Thorin Thrain's son Oakenshield, calling himself the king under the mountain, and we bid him consider well the claims that have been urged, or be declared our foe. At the least, he shall deliver 1/12 portion of the treasure unto Bard, as the dragon slayer and as the heir of Girion. From that portion Bard will himself contribute to the aid of Esgaroth. But if Thorin would have the friendship and honor of the lands about, as his sires had of old, then he will give also somewhat of his own, for the comfort of the men of the lake." Then Thorin seized a bow of horn, and shot an arrow at the speaker. It smote into his shield, and stuck there quivering. "Since such is your answer," he called in return, "I declare the mountain besieged. You shall not depart from it, until you call on your side for a truce and a parley. We will bear no weapons against you, but we leave you to your gold. You may eat that if you will."
I love that last little
snark on the way out.
That's awesome. That's such a jab.
I know, it's so great.
It's well played. I mean, really.
It is, yeah.
This is bad form. Let's just be clear about that.
Shooting a
herald. I mean,
a herald.
We talked about this, I think, when we talked about the films, or maybe we did. Maybe we've just talked about it off air. But, one of our gripes about the Lord of the Rings movies, as much as we enjoy those three, is the notion that Aragorn would actually cut the head off the mouth of Sauron.
Off the mouth of Sauron as a herald.
Not okay. Aragorn would never do that. He's a king. He understands the rules of parley. He would never, ever, ever do that. It's dishonorable. Even though everybody in the audience cheered when that moment happened, right? I mean, it's...
Sure, because it's cool for a modern audience.
Yeah, sure, of course.
You want to see it. Yeah, of course.
But it's not the same as him cutting the head off of Lurtz. That was a cheer moment, but this is not, because it's not a kingly thing to do.
Right.
And here we've got another king, doing a bad thing. And that's the point. Here we're supposed to see this as a very bad thing.
This is a huge breach of
it's a huge breach of etiquette, yeah. And Ratliff tells us that. He says, attacking a herald, even symbolically like this, which assumes he was trying to shoot the shield. and I think he was. I don't think
he probably was. Yeah, he probably wasn't really trying to,
because he didn't send a second arrow after it. So I agree with Ratliff that this was symbolic. Attacking a herald even symbolically like this was, of course, a gross violation of the heroic code, and hence significant. It shows that even if Thorin is within his rights to withhold charity and not to negotiate under threat, and quite justified in his resentment of the Elven King, he is still, in Gandalf's words, not making a very splendid figure as king under the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
It's true.
So even if he was right in all of his motivations,
in every other thing,
his actions are not kingly.
Yeah. No, not kingly at all.
And it's very interesting that the herald actually calls him. He addresses him
calling himself the king under the mountain.
Calling himself the king under the mountain. There's a subtle little jab there.
There really is. The self-proclaimed king under the mountain.
He's saying that Bard and that side aren't really recognizing Thorin as king.
Sure.
I think they would, but
I think they will.
It's a little rhetorical flourish.
It is
to say that you're just calling yourself this at this point.
Yeah, because right now you haven't shown yourself to be kingly.
Right.
I do think it's very, very significant that the heralds tell him, look, we're calling this a siege now. You're not going to leave until you sit down and talk with us. But we will bear no weapons against you. We're not going to attack you.
Yeah.
We're just going to sit here.
Yeah. We're going to sit here and wait until you see reason, basically.
Right. Mm-hmm. Until you get hungry enough to eat your gold.
Right.
It's just that's awesome little snark. I love that.
Right now, Thorin's thinking about, let's see, what can I make with gold? I can make a gold stew.
I can make a gold pie.
Yeah.
We can slice it really thin and make gold
sandwich. Of course, they've got no bread.
Well, there you go. Yeah, well, they got cram. They could cut the cram open into slices and make a cram sandwich. That's just terrible.
No, Alan.
Terrible.
Why?
I will sentence myself to 30 minutes in the chamber of terrible puns for that one.
Yeah, that's bad.
So I have to say that the demands are not terrible. 1/12 of the treasure.
Yeah.
Not 1/12 of the treasure to the Dragon Slayer and 1/12 of the treasure to the heir of Girion and 1/12 of the treasure to the men of Lake Town.
No, just 1/12.
1/12 period.
To Bard, and Bard will dole out, what we need. Yeah.
Because Bard is generous, unlike you.
Right.
But, by the way, if you want to have the friendship and honor, as your fathers did, I mean, that's really important, then, you need to do this.
A reminder that, your sires didn't rule this kingdom alone. They had help from the people around them. They had the friendship of people around them.
That's really, that's key. It really is.
Yeah.
Most dwarves, we're told, except for Bomber, Feely, and Keely, have sided with Thorin now.
Mm-hmm.
Just heartbreaking at that point to think that even Balin has maybe sided with Thorin at this point.
That is sad when you say it like that. Yeah, because we expect Feely and Keely to be on Bilbo's. They tend to.
Yeah, they're younger.
They're younger.
More...
They tend to align with Bilbo a lot more. But But Balin. Well, maybe if it.
And
if
Bomber,
Bilbo...
who's just not wanting to go without food.
Yeah, he's just like, I don't know if I can withstand a siege.
How much cram can I eat?
And Bilbo's last line there is so great about
isn't it?
Cram just sticking in his throat.
Well, but even the whole place stinking of dragon, it's not just the mountain anymore. It's kind of the valley too, the with the Elven King and Bard and the Men of the Lake.
The whole showdown is very dragon-like, very dragon-sick.
It really is. It really is. It's a sad, sad moment.
Yeah. The dragon is nowhere near gone from this place. The dragon may be dead, but the dragonness is still very much here.
Yeah.
But I know we want to spend some time talking about something we were reminded of, I should say, when we were reading this. I was struck by how much Thorin's actions here seem to echo the actions of Melkor in the Ainulindale.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember back in episode 5, and I know you do because we talked about this already.
Of course, yeah.
Episode 5, when we talked about the Ainulindale, and we dubbed Melkor's 4 sins, the 4 sins of Melkor.
Yeah.
And we've talked about them a little bit since then because they've been sort of a template for, I guess you could say, villainous or flawed characters throughout the Legendarium.
Sure.
You mentioned Feanor, Eöl, Maeglin, Saruman. We haven't talked about Saruman too much yet, but the list goes on of how different villains sort of echo these actions of Melkor and the Ainulindale.
Yeah, these characteristics, these traits, yeah.
Yeah. And as much as I hate to put Thorin in that group, I have to say that at least right now he really seems to be hitting on all of those 4 sins that we talked about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he doesn't belong there on a permanent basis like some of those others, but right now his behavior is really showing those traits. For his sake, at least it's not permanent. But this behavior recently has demonstrated these things. It's kind of as though dragon sickness causes one to behave rather like Melkor, and really that makes sense since he's the one who created the dragons. So let's take a look back at those 4 sins of Melkor for those who may not recall all of them. Sean, why don't you start off with the first one? Yeah.
So the first one we came up with was pride. And remember, in the Ainulindale, Melkor sought to increase the power and glory of his own part.
Right.
In the music, of course. Here, Thorin has proclaimed himself Thorin, son of Thrain, king under the mountain. He's basically recognizing himself as king when nobody around him does.
Right.
And he's refusing to reduce the size of his spoils, even to help those who helped him. Yeah. And I think that's very prideful.
It would take humility to do that. Yeah. You're right. That is prideful.
He is trying to increase the power and glory of his own part here, definitely.
Oh, yes, certainly. And then one of the other things we saw was Melkor's desire to possess and dominate. The line was something like, desire grew hot in him to bring into being things of his own, things that he could possess and use. Well, here, Thorin has spent long hours in the treasury looking for the Arkenstone, yet he had an eye for many another wonderful thing, and then he refuses to give up any of them. He wants to possess all of this wealth for himself. He wants to dominate the area. He's not even thinking about whether these people can be his allies or even just good neighbors.
Yep. He just wants to be king and have his way.
Just the third can't wait to be king. Sorry.
Very nice. Very nice. Little Simba in there.
Yeah.
So the third one is impatience. Remember, Melkor was impatient of the void's emptiness.
Yeah, that was a big one for him.
And that was a very big one for him. And Thorin, while it's a different kind of impatience, I think there is clearly impatience here. The whole be gone now before our arrows fly. And then the next herald, basically thwack with
Shoot
the
him in the
arrow, you know,
shield.
pretty quickly. He is very
no
impatient
patience.
here. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest one we see, really, is the one that was probably the hardest to kind of define in Melkor's case was that, well, I shouldn't say hardest to define, but one that I don't think was obvious. I think everybody could see his pride. Everybody could see his impatience, his desire to possess. They're really spelled out in almost those words. But one of the things that really caused Melkor's fall was this self-isolation or withdrawal from community.
Yeah.
The line that I recall was that Melkor, being alone, had begun to conceive thoughts of his own unlike those of his brethren. In other words, that isolation caused him to be out of sync with those that he should have been allied with, that he should have been of one mind with. And in later characters, we see this show up as their refusal to accept the counsel of others.
Kind of
Thorin
do their
not
own
only-
thing, even when they're given
even when they're given
advice.
really wise advice, like cast down the stones of your pride.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm on my way. I approve this message. So Thorin not only refuses to listen to good counsel, whether it comes from Bard or Roäc, and we'll see more on that next chapter, but he even refuses to acknowledge fellowship with the people of Laketown, who've, like you've talked about a number of times so far, who've suffered the same fate that his people suffered 171 years ago.
Yep.
And in a more literal sense, in terms of isolation, he's built the wall and refuses to come out to parley.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, very much so. So, yeah, I mean, definitely Thorin is hitting on all of those characteristics of the most villainous characters of the Legendarium, and there's just there's no question about it right now. This is Thorin. Thorin's a bad guy here.
Yeah,
Only
he is.
right now.
And, I know. We're so grateful that it's temporary, but boy, that temporary problem, causes some serious bloodshed. So, which we'll find out about in the next chapter.
Very soon.
Now, it may not rank up there with the four sins of Melkor, but we know, thanks to modern technology, that some of you, shame, tisk, 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 tune out for a few minutes after our chapter discussion. We get it. No, we do. In fact, we realize that we've kind of sunk into a little bit of a rut. So we've mixed things up a bit, and we are not going to ask you for anything. So please stick around because we have some really good stuff coming up in Barnabas' bag.
Yes, and if you skip ahead, you will miss some really good stuff. But
yes, you
first,
will.
We do want to remind you that our live appearance at Mythmoot 5 is fast approaching.
Yes, it is. In fact, it's hard to believe that in just a little over a month, we're going to be special guests at Mythmoot 5, taking place June 21st to 24th, 2018, for those listening in the deep, dark future, at the beautiful National Conference Center in Leesburg, Virginia.
Now, Mythmoot is a combination literary conference and fan convention, sponsored by Signum University. Now, it's even more than that, but it's primarily about enjoying one another's company while we celebrate and engage with the stories we love.
Absolutely. And for us, it's also about doing a live episode broadcast from the main room with no other events going on in our time slot to distract everybody.
Whew, it'll be a challenge, but we love a challenge, don't we?
Yes,
and this
we
one's
do.
absolutely going to be worth it. We're going to be joined by some special guests, including John Garth, Corey Olson, Douglas Anderson, and Mark Ockrand.
That's right. And we'll be airing that live on Facebook at the time of the event. That's Saturday, June 23rd at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. And we'll be putting it up on the podcast feed as a regular episode. Hopefully on time, even though that'll mean me editing through the night instead of enjoying some fellowship with our fellow Mythmooters, Mythmoodians, whatever.
Mythmoutians. Seriously, though, folks, if that episode is delayed that weekend, please cut my co-host some slack. We really expect to be having a great time there with some wonderful and brilliant people. Alan, I don't want you feeling like you got to stay in all night Saturday to edit audio.
Well, on time or a day late, the timing is still working out perfectly for us because that live episode is going to be happening right as we're wrapping up The Hobbit and getting ready for Season 3.
That's right. So if you want a chance to come see us live, go find out more and register by visiting tinyurl.com/mythmootv, as in Mythmoot 5, before the deadline of May 31st.
Now, I said we weren't going to ask you for anything, and that's still true. You know where we stand on our goals. You can check that out at patreon.com/prancingponypod, and that's all we'll say about that.
But of course, we do still want to give a very special shout out to our patrons at the Kierdan's contribution tier. That's DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Don in Vancouver Island, and Emily in Texas. Thank you all.
Well, Sean, why don't we go ahead and get on with Barlaman's bag?
All right. Well, our first question comes to us from our old friend Maya in Michigan, one of our Patreon supporters.
It's been a while since we've heard from her, yeah.
It has been a while, yep. She's one of our Patreon supporters enjoying that priority handling for questions to Barlaman's bag.
Yep.
Maya writes, I was wondering, when the characters in Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit sing, how should we interpret it? Are they actually singing, or is that merely a quirk of how it was transmitted in later incarnations of the philological, historic, mythological records of Middle-earth? Personally, she says, I believe it depends on the case. Did Bilbo actually write and recite a song about Eärendil? Probably yes. Did Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli actually spontaneously burst into perfect poetry after Boromir's death? I doubt it. Could it be recorded this way in the philological record? Absolutely. It happens all the time in real life.
That's an interesting question, Maya. Sean, being the philological person that you are, I'm going to ask you to take the lead on this one.
I'll do my best. I will say that in my real life, I very rarely burst into songs spontaneously, and never in perfect unison with two friends. I don't know how all those guys did it on the barricades in Les Miserables.
Oh, well, yeah.
But no, I suspect that Maya is right. I think it probably depends on the case. Just in this chapter, we saw the dwarves very clearly singing a song. You talked about this, that they got out musical instruments and made music to lighten the mood and to drown out the elf song outside. And they sang a song that they already knew. It was a song that they sang long before in Bilbo's Hole. They made some changes to it.
They just changed the words, yeah.
Yeah, but it was still a song that already existed. I think that I don't know about all, but I think most of the occurrences of song in The Hobbit are actual songs. I'm thinking of like the elves' Tra-la-la Lally, the goblin song, which we know was used to keep time.
Snap, crack,
yeah,
crack. Yeah.
The wind song from Beorn's Hall. I think those are all actual songs.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, not only were there instruments when they were there described on many occasions, but we get descriptors of voices and the fact that music was included. I couldn't help but think of the example in Chapter 1 about the deep-throated singing of the dwarves.
That's right.
The bit in the text that says that this is a fragment of their song if it can be like their song without their music. So clearly there was music there.
Yeah.
Other clues in the text surrounding these segments lead me to the conclusion that they were indeed songs and not just poetic language that was written down later as a song.
Yeah, I think that's true. Now, if we go to The Lord of the Rings, I think it's less clear sometimes, and that could be partly because Lord of the Rings is just generally a more serious work. In Lord of the Rings, I think we can find examples of both actual songs that were sung and spoken words. So I pulled out a few here. So there's The Road Goes Ever On and On from Book 1, Chapter 3. We're told Frodo actually spoke that one.
Right.
But then you get something like the Man in the Moon song that he sings in The Prancing Pony. That one he sang. And again, that was a song that already existed. That was a song that Bilbo had made up, so it wasn't like it was spontaneous singing.
No, he knew that, yeah.
Yeah. Gandalf's words from Galadriel to Aragorn, that's kind of one of my favorites. The Where Now Are the Dunedain, Elisar, Elisar.
Oh, yeah.
That seems to be spoken. Eomer's elegy for Theoden, the Mourn Not Overmuch, Mighty Was the Fallen. Now, that's actually alliterative poetry, but I don't believe it was actually sung. I think it's kind of more like a spoken ceremonial language. I don't know. I mean, do you have any thoughts on any of those or anything else?
Well, I mean, it's a really big topic, and it's one that we could, in theory, spend an entire episode on. So,
that's true.
Patrons at the Kier Dance contribution tier, maybe you want to throw that out there as a topic for one of our quarterly specials. But
there you go.
I do tend to take the notion of song more literally than others might.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a heroic and mythic world, and more importantly, it was a medieval world. Song played a huge cultural role. They didn't have iPods or Beats headphones. I mean, these people sang socially. It was a way for stories and a way for tales to make their way from generation to generation. Songs lasted for decades and decades instead of 3 months before it's forgotten like today.
Right. That's true.
People
That's
knew
very well
the
said.
musical. I don't know if it's well said.
No, it's a good point.
Yeah, I think people knew the musical language of the time because there weren't 1,000 songs coming out from music studios every week. That smaller musical vocabulary, would mean that most people would be familiar with common tunes that might be used for multiple songs. If it says it's a song,
Yeah, it's a song. And we do see that in Lord of the Rings about, characters creating new words to an existing tune. I think we see that a few times. I think Sam does that. It seems a very Hobbitish thing to do.
It does. You're right. They're musical people, I think. I mean, that seems clear.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think if we go back to the Lament for Boromir, I mean, I also tend to lean towards the idea that that song was actually sung, not just spoken. For starters, the text does use the word sing to introduce every verse. And although it does seem incredible for us in real life, I think, it is meant to be sort of part of the magic, if I can use that word loosely, part of the magic of the world. It's just a characteristic of the secondary world.
Sort of that green sun stuff we were talking about before.
I think it is
like the idea of genetic language transmission makes no sense.
Right.
But in his world, it fits because he's written it in a way that makes it believable. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Maybe we know breaking into spontaneous song does not make sense, but to Aragorn and Legolas...
I just want to sing.
I just want to sing. There'll be no singing here.
No singing here. Sorry.
But maybe Aragorn and Legolas did actually break into song sometimes because they were, working from established tunes. I mean, I'm sure they didn't do it every morning, but while
Good
lamenting
morning,
a fallen
Legolas. Good morning, Aragorn. No.
That would be like the Les Mis version of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, exactly. A true full-on musical.
But here they're lamenting a fallen friend. I mean, who knows? Maybe there is sort of a traditional funeral tune that they're singing.
That's kind of what I'm thinking, or at least a concept,
Yeah, I mean, I think basically what we're dealing with is this is a world where sometimes heroes make up poetry on the fly. And the fact that it's a more poetic world makes it a more mythical world, which I think is in keeping with Tolkien's ideas about the intersection between language and myth. I think it's very in keeping with some of the ideas of Owen Barfield, who we talked about not too long ago.
I remember that.
So, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think we're on the same page, and I think it's. I think when it says there are songs, I think they're actually sung.
I absolutely agree, and I'm genuinely surprised. I actually thought you'd go the other way on this. In a purely modern context,
because I don't usually break into songs spontaneously, but
well, no, I know you don't break into songs spontaneously. you don't know what I do when we're not recording. But,
I would love to video, it didn't happen.
No, it didn't happen. That's the whole point. In a purely modern context, really, it is impossible to think of Aragorn and Legolas breaking into song moments after putting Boromir's body on a funeral boat and watching it go over the falls of Rauros. But, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all that a learned and well-traveled man like Aragorn would know an appropriate tune and be able to quickly assemble a couple of verses to honor Boromir over the matter of, several minutes. It does say they were quiet for a while before the singing. So, he's no doubt an accomplished storyteller. I mean, no, he's not a skald or a bard or any of those things, but he's been around, right? I mean, he's old.
He is.
And, only a man with a poet's heart could win Arwen. So, I can buy that.
There you go.
Now, if Gimli had actually sung a verse, that might put my theory in doubt. I don't think Gimli was very musical, but I don't know. I take that back now, actually, because the dwarves, we don't see him seeming to be musical in Lord of the Rings, but clearly the dwarves are a very musical culture, as we've found in throughout
very
the
much
Hobbit.
So. Yeah.
But he didn't sing a verse, right? It was Aragorn, Legolas, Aragorn, and then Gimli's like, you left that east wind to me.
You left the east wind to me, and I'm not going to do it.
South wind or east wind? I don't remember which one.
I think it was the east.
I think so.
It's the evil one.
Yeah. It is the east wind because it's always the east is the bad thing. So yeah. But with Aragorn
they didn't give him a chance,
too,
before. It was Aragorn and then Legolas, and then I think it was Aragorn again,
jumps
right?
back in like, I'm not going to let Gimli take this one.
Sing. Yeah.
Which is probably a
I got
wise
this
move.
one, bro. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I got you, man. I got you. You don't have to do this.
That's great. Well, good. Well, I think that wraps it up for Maya's question. Why don't we go ahead into our next question, which comes to us from Jake L. in Virginia. Jake said, I can't remember hearing it in a podcast, so I thought I'd ask. Have you already covered the little mystery set by J.R.R. Tolkien in letter number 25 regarding the 2 one-year halts in writing The Hobbit? If not, could you throw this as a question at Barliman, please?
Well, of course. Jake is referring to letter number 25 to the editor of The Observer, which we have talked about a few times recently, but we haven't gone into this particular part. The last paragraph of that letter offers this little riddle. Finally, I present the future researcher with a little problem. The tale halted in the telling for about a year at 2 separate points. Where are they?
I remember that.
I bet that was like Ratliff's, a total inspiration to write.
His whole reason for
volumes.
writing the history of the Hobbit. Yeah. Yeah, and I think he is the one who's answered the riddle.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't he? But I think I decided to let you take this one. So why don't you tell us what you found?
I appreciate that. Yeah, it is Ratliff, and given how hard he worked on the history of the Hobbit, it's no surprise that he's pretty sure he's worked it out. And he describes it in the introduction to the history of the Hobbit. So here's that quote. Several sharp breaks that occur in the manuscript where the handwriting, names of characters, and paper all change. Large sections are consistent in writing style and the paper used. only to have no less than 3 sudden and marked changes in writing paper and handwriting, the first and last of which almost certainly mark the long hiatuses Tolkien described in his letter to the Observer. Now, those 3 sudden and marked changes, and there are 3 because that's key because there's only 2 separate points, but the 3 sudden and marked changes occur midway through Chapter 1, Bilbo, Gandalf, and the Dwarves looking at Thror's map, and just after the beginning of what is now Chapter 9, so that's going to be Barrels Out of Bond, I believe, and then about a third of the way through what's now Chapter 15, the conversation with Roäc.
Okay, that's right. And so the first and last of those, as Ratliff says, are almost certainly those 2 places where the tale halted. So that would be the Chapter 1 one when they're looking at Thror's map, and then Chapter 15, basically what we covered in this episode, the conversation with Roäc. That seems pretty well tied up. Thank you, and thank you,
It sure
John
does.
Ratliff.
Yeah, and thank you, Maya and Jake. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. We look forward to having you come back and join us again next time when we come to Chapter 16 of The Hobbit.
Oh, get ready, folks, because we're about to see the return of an old friend, somebody we haven't heard from in a long time.
Does this old friend happen to have spectacular hair? Or do you mean the old guy with a stick?
I think I mean the second one. Yeah.
I think you do. In the meantime, folks, we do invite you to please check out the official library tab on our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got links to everything from inexpensive paperbacks to some really good stuff for your Tolkien collection.
And if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes for us and leaving a review, we'd certainly be grateful. Those reviews help us get more visibility in iTunes, and that translates to a bigger and more exciting community of Tolkien lovers.
And thank you to those of you who have, by the way. Not only do we still read every one of them, and we always will, but we also are featuring one a week on our social media networks on #ThankfulThursdays. Make sure you never miss an episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast by subscribing to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And we want to thank all of you who've become part of our social media family. We set out to start a Tolkien conversation that everybody could join, and that's why we have our online common room on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and tips for getting dragon stench out of a dwarf hole to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And we'll try to get them into our next episode. Well, what about an hour 35? Still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.